Chapter 4. The Industrial Boom, America circa 1872. The cannons of the late war had fallen silent less than a decade past, but a new kind of thunder was rolling across the American continent. It wasn't the roar of artillery, but the roar of foundries, the shriek of steam whistles, the rhythmic clang of steel on steel, the relentless earth-shaking percussion of an industrial behemoth awakening. From the ashes of conflict, the United States was being reforged, not in the crucible of ideology alone, but in the white-hot furnaces of a burgeoning industrial age. "Progress, my boy, progress," a stout businessman in a bowler hat might exclaim to his companion, gesturing towards a newly constructed factory belching plumes of dark smoke into the city sky. "That's the sound of America growing, fortunes to be made." The nation, it seemed, had flung itself headlong into a future of limitless possibility, or so the broadsheets proclaimed. Railroads, like iron tentacles, were stretching ever westward, binding distant territories to the bustling commercial hearts of the East. "Heard they laid another 20 miles of track on the Union Pacific line last week," a man might say, reading his newspaper in a crowded coffee house. Imagine that, coast to coast in a matter of days. Each new mile of track laid was a conduit for an unprecedented flow of raw materials, manufactured goods, and people. George Thiel, crisscrossing the country on Pinkerton's business, had witnessed this explosive growth firsthand. He'd seen prairie towns sprout from nothing around a newly built depot, their populations doubling, then tripling in a matter of months. "Came here 2 years ago, was nothing but grass and sky," a shopkeeper in one such raw-boned Kansas town might tell him. "Now look at us. Got a bank, 2 churches, and 3 saloons, all thanks to the railroad." He'd seen mountains tunneled and rivers bridged with an audacity that bordered on the divine or the profane, depending on one's perspective. This iron lattice was the skeleton upon which a new corporate anatomy was swiftly growing. Enterprises of a scale previously unimaginable were coalescing, their names Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller beginning to echo with a baronial authority. "Vanderbilt's bought another line," one clerk might whisper to another in a Wall Street office. "Man's going to own every damn railroad in the country if we're not careful." These were not mere businesses. They were empires of timber, coal, steel, and oil, commanded by men whose ambition seemed as boundless as the continent itself. They spoke of manifest destiny, not just for the nation, but for their own commercial ventures, their telegraph wires humming with orders that could make or break fortunes, their ledger books swelling with profits that dwarfed the treasuries of small nations. Innovation was the lifeblood of this expansion. "Seen that new Bessemer converter down at the mills?" a steelworker might ask his mate, wiping sweat from his brow. "Turns iron to steel like magic. Stronger, cheaper. They'll be building skyscrapers to the moon with that stuff." McCormick's Reaper was transforming agriculture, freeing up legions for the factories. The telegraph, that marvel of instantaneous communication, was shrinking distances, allowing for the centralized control of sprawling commercial enterprises. "Got a wire from the Chicago office this morning," a factory manager in Pittsburgh might announce. "New orders, double production for the next month." Steam power, harnessed in ever larger and more efficient engines, drove the pistons of industry, the paddle wheels of commerce, and the locomotives that were the era's iron horses. Cities swelled, drawing in the rural poor, and a relentless tide of immigrants from a troubled Europe. "Another boatload arrived from Ireland yesterday," a dock worker in New York might observe, "and Germans the day before. Where are they all going to fit?" Chicago, where Thiel had learned his trade, was a prime example, a raw, chaotic symphony of construction and destruction. Its air thick with the smoke of 1,000 chimneys and the babble of a dozen languages. New York, Philadelphia, St. Louis, all were magnets, their populations exploding, their skylines beginning to etch upwards. Within these burgeoning metropolises, stark contrast festered. Opulent mansions rose on broad avenues, their windows blazing with gaslight, carriages pulling up to disgorge ladies in silks and gentlemen in fine wool. "Did you see the Astor's new ballroom?" one society matron might whisper to another over tea. "Simply divine. Cost a king's ransom, I hear." Just blocks away, entire families crammed into squalid tenements, their lives circumscribed by poverty, disease, and the grinding demands of the factory floor. Another child lost to the fever in our building, a woman with tired eyes might confide to her neighbor over a shared clothesline. No food, no medicine. What's a body to do? For this new industrial order demanded an army of labor, and it found one in the dispossessed and the hopeful. Men, women, and often children spent 12, sometimes 14 hours a day tending machines, feeding furnaces, or toiling in the darkness of mines. My boy, just turned 10, works the breaker lines at the colliery, a miner might say with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Small hands, good for sorting slate, brings home a few pennies. Their individual efforts were dwarfed by the scale of the enterprise, their lives often viewed by their employers as just another resource to be exploited. It was from these conditions, from this vast and often impersonal machinery of production, that a new countervailing force began to stir, the nascent labor movement. Whispers in workshops grew into clandestine meetings in tavern back rooms. Brothers, a man with calloused hands and a fiery gaze might address a hushed gathering. "We break our backs for pennies while the owners grow fat. We face death and injury every day with no recompense. Is this justice? Is this the American dream?" Men bound by shared hardship and a dawning sense of collective identity began to speak of unions, of fair wages, of an 8-hour day, of safety in the workplace. Organizations like the Knights of Labor and various craft unions started to gain traction, their calls for solidarity echoing nervously in the boardrooms of the new industrial barons. To the owners and managers, these movements were often seen not as a quest for justice, but as a dangerous conspiracy. "It's foreign agitators, I tell you," a factory owner might declare to his colleagues at the local business association. "Anarchists and socialists poisoning the minds of good, honest workers. It's an affront to the sacred rights of property and contract, a threat to the very foundations of American enterprise. We must crush it before it spreads." The prevailing philosophy was one of laissez-faire. Government should keep its hands off business, was the common refrain in commercial circles. Let the market regulate itself. The invisible hand will guide us to prosperity. This freedom allowed for spectacular growth and innovation, but it also permitted the accumulation of immense power in the hands of a few, and often left the individual worker with little recourse against exploitation. Public law enforcement, a patchwork of often underfunded, undertrained, and politically beholden local police forces and county sheriffs, was ill-equipped to deal with the complexities of this new era. "Got another riot down by the docks," a weary police captain might sigh. "Overcrowded cities, too much drink, not enough men to keep the peace, let alone investigate these fancy financial crimes the papers talk about. They struggle to cope with the rising crime rates, let alone the challenges of policing labor disputes that could flare into violence across multiple jurisdictions." The Pinkertons had risen to prominence partly by filling this vacuum, offering a private, well-organized force that could operate where public authority was weak or absent. This was the world George Thiel was surveying with an increasingly analytical eye. A world of unprecedented opportunity and profound social dislocation. A world of breathtaking progress and brutal inequality. A world where powerful interests were desperately seeking means to protect their assets, control their expanding workforces, and navigate the turbulent waters of rapid change. The air itself seemed charged with a volatile energy, a sense of immense forces building towards an uncertain future. It was a landscape ripe for a man of his particular talents, a man who understood the shadows as well as the gleaming promise of the industrial boom. The ground was fertile, not just for industry and ambition, but for the kind of services he was beginning to envision. The age demanded it.